Welcome, everybody, to the overview of healthcare life safety code requirements for 2020. We'll be getting started in about 1 minute, so that's your 1 minute warning. All right, it's 2 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Colin, you back? I just want to verify you're back.
I'm back.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining this session. Today we're talking about, this is I think our 4th session in our user experience since we couldn't do this in person this year. We're doing it all virtually, 1 or 2 sessions a week. So this is our 3rd to the last session. We do have 2 sessions next week. One is on clinical engineering asset standardization. That is the October 27th at 1 p.m. I believe that's Tuesday. And then next Wednesday, we wrap up this user experience with the increasing the value of your inspection, testing, and maintenance program, your ITM program. That's your PMs and procedures and making sure you're all compliant. But today, the session you all signed up for is the an overview of healthcare life safety code requirements. So sort of some hot topics for 2020. And I apologize for the confusion with the dates. We had just put something wrong on our website. So thanks for coming and thanks for attending. If you know someone that was going to attend but couldn't today, there will be a recording of this as well. But I'm going to turn this over to Colin McKay, and he'll do himself better justice introducing himself and what he does than I will. So Colin.
Well, thanks, Joe. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group here. Unfortunately, we're not able to be in person, but this is, I guess it's going to have to be the next best thing. So thanks, everyone. So who am I? I'm Colin McKay. I work for RPA, Russell Phillips and Associates. We're now a Jensen Hughes company. I'm a supervisor under the life safety section there at RPA. I have different certifications, and my background is primarily healthcare compliance for life safety. So I started out in the healthcare world and kind of got stuck with it. And then it's been a great opportunity since. I've partnered first with Joe and the FSI team back 2008, 2009, and it's been a great relationship ever since. And so they asked me to talk a little bit about some of the life safety code requirements, some of the things that are going on in healthcare compliance these days. So I'll circle back towards the end as what the latest is, but I'm going to kind of start at the top to kind of give an overview of the healthcare compliance, what's the particular reasons and things that we have to do these inspections and testing, maintenance, all those things, and kind of the background as to why and who makes us do that.
And if I may interrupt for one second,
sure.
Colin. But there is a Q&A panel. If you look towards the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a Q&A window that you can pop up. If you want to go ahead and type any questions you have during the session there, that would be helpful. And both Colin and I, well, everybody probably could see those questions, and we'll try to answer them as we go. And then one note, Colin, I don't know if it's on your window or my window, but there's a little orange box that says, "Please move this window away from."
I
don't know if that's you or me. I don't know if I can do that or move that or what that is, but
it says to move it away. I don't know what to move it away from.
Yeah, okay, just checking. So I'm not sure why that's there, but sorry about that, but go ahead and continue.
All right. So that was a little bit of background for myself, background of RPA and kind of who we are. We've got this 3-tiered approach to how we conduct ourselves. This first is leadership. We have folks that sit in leadership positions, sit on technical committees, sit on codes and standards committees, steering committees. We have folks on our team that help write the codes. We have an understanding for why they're written the way they are, so we can help you comply with those rules and regulations. Research. After fire events, after emergency events, we go out and conduct staff interviews. We research what happened, what worked, what didn't work during that event, to find out, how we can solve these problems for next time. And the application is where we take that information we know is required, the best practices out there, and we put into programs like this that we can educate further and kind of continue the cycle from there out. So that's kind of who we are as a group to pass this information along. So what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about healthcare accreditation, kind of the really high level, who is responsible, who are we looking to satisfy there. Talk about some life safety code requirements, some typical findings, some common deficiencies that we see out there in the field. We're going to talk about the CMS 1135 waivers that kind of has been going around and talked about. Not so much lately, but it's still in effect. So I wanted to talk about what they are and what they apply to, and also what they don't apply to. So you can roll that into your area. And then we have some hot topics, some things fresh off the presses from the ASHE conference to pass along what the Joint Commission is looking for out there, and what kind of the high level stuff of what you can be worried about for what their current hot topics are out there. So let's get right into it. We have kind of the overview is, so CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is this overarching federal body that reimburses hospitals for their healthcare services, but they only get that reimbursement when they are proving that they meet certain safety requirements. And whether it's a hospital, nursing home, ambulatory surgery center, medical office building, there are 17 total different types of medical and healthcare type of um, type of organizations that CMS oversees. There are many regulations from a variety of different topics. The topics that we're focused on mostly is the physical environment or the fire and life safety aspects of those CMS requirements. The Joint Commission is one of the top four. There are several, but the top four main accrediting organizations. Um, so we're going to focus our attention primarily onto the Joint Commission requirements and where they're coming from. But there are several other organizations out there, HVAP, DNV, AAAHC. The Joint Commission is the largest and typically has the most clients across the country. They essentially work for and report to CMS. Basically, they're CMS's eyes and ears out there, so that CMS doesn't have to get to all the hospitals. They can rely on other parties to be their eyes and ears. Again, they have regulations that we're following that are slightly different sometimes than what CMS is looking for, a little bit more restrictive because they want to make us all better out there than the minimum code requirements. But a lot of the regulations are definitely one and the same. And again, it's from the physical environment, the fire safety, and the life safety code aspect of it. Joint Commission has accreditation surveys every 3 years. They're on the 3-year cycle. CMS will have what's called walk-behind surveys or validation surveys. They're going to do 5 to 10% of all the Joint Commission surveys. CMS will come behind and say, you know what, we're going to just do a double check and make sure that Joint Commission is providing the information and holding it to the standard that we're looking for. There's complaint surveys. If there's some sort of complaint, medical issue that happened, CMS will get involved there. And then there's other special surveys that they conduct. So a variety of different reasons for why CMS would show up to a given hospital. But the Joint Commission is there pretty regularly every 3 years. They kind of have an 18-month to 3-year window, but they're generally around the 3-year time frame for when they're coming back to perform those accreditation surveys. So that's really the high level for who is asking for these regulations and why we have to meet these things. Now let's talk a little bit about what the life safety code is itself. So it's got this 3-tiered approach. You kind of see how we stole um, our initial bullet point there for how we had our baskets of leadership, research, and application. Well, it's kind of the same process. We have these 3-tiered. It's design, construction, compartmentation. How is the building built? Prevention and planning and training. How can we live and work in this environment and use those features to our advantage when we're in the building during a given fire event? And then detection, alarm, and extinguishment to help us do that, to be and work and live in those buildings, those environments. So those 3 separate types of features and those practices all work together in conjunction to provide a safe work environment for us in our hospitals, and a variety of other occupancies. But we're going to focus our attention on healthcare specifically for this session. So what are we looking at? Well, For a long time, for a while, we were dealing with the 2000 edition of the Life Safety Code, but as of July 5th, 2016, a few years back now, the CMS put out a final rule and they had formally adopted the 2012 edition of the Life Safety Code. And that was instituted back in November 2016. So what does that do for us? Well, it changed some of the regulations we had to follow. And at this point, we're a few years into this cycle, and I'm assuming that a lot of us on the line here have been through a number of different 2012 life safety code classes. But we wanted to take a little bit different approach and show you, all right, well, yes, so the code changes, but what does that do for us? What are we still finding out there in the field? And that's where I'm going to provide some examples here and with some real life situations of how we can apply these things. One of the big differences when the 2012 life safety code was adopted was not only did we get all of the actual text of 101, but we also got new text and new reference publications for all of the reference standards. So NFPA 10 for fire extinguishers, that got a whole new standard. NFPA 13 is for sprinklers, that got a whole new standard. You can see the examples here specific to that, just to name a few. So what does that mean? Well, we got a whole different list of regulations just in that change of text. So where are some of the specific changes? For instance, NFPA 80 for fire doors, the big difference from the previous edition, the 1999 edition of NFPA 80, to the reference standard of 2010. Now we have to perform our annual fire door inspections. That's a big difference from the previous edition. That one's been talked about quite a bit, but that's just one example of one change in one text. So you can imagine the different levels of changes that have occurred in each of these. And we're going to touch on a few of these. Sprinkler protection. Um, so their sprinklers are required in hospitals that were built after 1991 and when the construction type requires it. So if you have a really tall building that's of a certain construction type, you're going to have to put sprinklers in. One thing that changed when the 2012 edition was adopted was all high-rise hospitals are required to be sprinklered by 2028. There kind of was a 12-year gap, 12-year allowance to get up to compliance and bring all high-rise hospitals that might not be fully sprinklered now. By 2028, you're going to have to be. So what does that do for us? Well, several requirements are going to be reduced if we become sprinklered. Our corridor walls that would typically have to have a 30-minute fire rating are reduced down to strictly a smoke partition. Delayed egress locks, if we're trying to lock up our building for different security measures or for not allowing certain parts of the public to get to certain parts of the building, well, you want to put in delayed egress locks. Well, to do that, you have to have a fully sprinklered building. If you have a penthouse or a mechanical type of space that opens onto your exit stair enclosure, that type of situation is not permitted if your building isn't sprinklered. So it's these things that are you gain those credits, you gain that allowance by having sprinkler protection in your building, and this is just some specifics for some of those advantages. So what happens when we try and fully sprinkler our building? Well, sometimes we don't get every single space. So what do we see out there in the field? Well, some examples of inadequate coverage or maybe even missing coverage. Maybe there's a closet, some closets in um, nursing home locations. If it's a resident room closet in that space, that closet has to be sprinklered. As an example, sometimes closets just get overlooked in the design, and as you're going around doing your life safety code assessments, looking in every room, every nook and cranny, sometimes you find a closet that's just simply was overlooked and didn't get sprinklered. Combustible exterior canopies, if they're exceeding 4 feet. If you have an exterior canopy on your building and is made of combustible material, namely an awning or some sort of like wind catch, some sort of like rain awning that's connected to your building. If it's connected to the building, that combustible exterior canopy will have to be sprinklered if you want to have your building be considered fully sprinklered. Stairwells, you have to sprinkle your stairwells at the top and at the bottom. Sometimes the bottom gets overlooked. Electrical equipment rooms. There is an allowance to excuse or omit sprinkler protection from electrical equipment rooms if you have 2-hour rated construction. That's NFPA 13 gives us that allowance, but you do have to have that 2-hour rated enclosure. We've seen a lot of times where sprinklers get omitted and there's only perhaps a 1-hour rated enclosure built for that space. That's not necessarily sufficient, so we need to beef that up to a 2-hour construction. And in some jurisdictions, elevator equipment rooms are typically permitted to be omitted from sprinkler protection. So there's a really interesting kind of conversation there with electrical equipment rooms. Depending on the jurisdiction you're in, depending on the state or perhaps even the city that you're in, your local jurisdiction may not permit sprinklers to be installed in your elevator equipment rooms. Well, if that's the case, then we've seen CMS Joint Commission be okay and allow sprinklers to be omitted in those elevator equipment rooms. The hard part is not every jurisdiction is going to come right out and say we prohibit sprinklers. Most of the time, what we see in jurisdictions is they permit the omission of sprinklers in the elevator equipment rooms. So that's a bit of a different verbiage, isn't it? It's not that we prohibit them; you're allowed to omit them. Well, CMS doesn't allow that. So if your jurisdiction doesn't have a prohibition on sprinklers, then you're going to have to provide some sort of uh, fire protection in that room. Sometimes it's a clean agent system if you don't want water being thrown on the equipment, but some sort of alternative measure if your jurisdiction does not specifically prohibit sprinklers in elevator equipment rooms. So overall, we want to have sprinklers in every location, every occupiable space, and that's really what we're getting at. If we don't have them every single place, then we need to work on filling that space in there. More about sprinklers, some of the common deficiencies we see. Well, sometimes we see quick response sprinklers and standard response sprinklers in the same compartment. Now, compartment is a very interesting term when it comes to sprinkler placement. A lot of times in healthcare, we're talking about compartments, we're talking about smoke compartments. That's not what this is referring to. So, a compartment, when it comes to sprinkler protection and NFPA 13, they define that as basically an atmospheric compartment. So, a room or a space or an area, a part of a hallway. So, you can have mixed, quick response and standard response heads in a given smoke compartment if they're separated by a room or a door or maybe even a soffit. If you have a different height ceiling, you can potentially consider that a different compartment. So just be aware of that just because you have different response heads in a given smoke compartment doesn't necessarily mean you're mixed. So just keep an eye on that. And plus, if you have standard response heads throughout your area or a given part of the building, and maybe that head gets damaged or it starts to leak and you're going to replace it, make sure you're replacing it with the appropriate response type. Where we see these become mixed is they grab whatever head they had available and they plug it in there. It stops the leak, but now we start maybe perhaps we have a mixed head situation in that area. Sprinkler head spacing, if you're going to move around a room or you're going to turn two rooms into a single room or something of that nature, sometimes we can get sprinkler heads that are too close together. And how close is too close? Well, that's 6 feet is the magic number. So you want to make sure you're keeping your sprinkler heads greater than 6 feet apart. The incorrect orientation, sometimes in, say, an electrical closet or maybe an IT room, the ceiling has become a problem to maintain. So sometimes the answer is, well, let's just take the ceiling out of there. If we can't keep it smoke resistant, let's just take it out and make sure the walls go to the ceiling, go to the deck above. Well, if we do that and that room is sprinklered, we need to make sure that the sprinkler heads get rotated up and replaced with an upright type of head. So that's the idea there, the incorrect orientation of heads. If we have a change or some sort of different use of the space, we want to make sure we're accounting for that. Dusty, painted, damaged heads, we see that quite a bit. If you have a pendant style head that's sticking down from the ceiling, odds are it's going to grab some kind of dust. Hopefully it doesn't catch any paint or any kind of damage, but those things can happen, and that's where you want to make sure you're catching that on an annual sprinkler head inspection. Water flow was not conducted or documented via the inspector's test connection. We see that too, as just make sure your maintenance is being conducted in accordance with NFPA 25. Again, 25 changed. It changed in some fashions, um, not necessarily in frequency or anything, but definitely in organization of the standard itself. So now, if you have a current edition of NFPA 25, you can see that the requirements are laid out in nice charts, and they're easy to read, they're easy to follow, so you can clearly see your different types of features and protection that you have in the building and how often you need to maintain those. So here's some examples of sprinkler type of situations. You see here, there's the head's got beat up a little bit here in this closet, and it's also got stuff stored way too close to it. Again, here, a lot of times the staff in the building don't know that, or perhaps even so staff in the building don't necessarily know that that is actually a sprinkler head, the concealed type. So you can see there that the storage has gotten too close to the sprinkler head, and it will obstruct its spray pattern. You can see down here that the sprinkler head has been painted and damaged. So this is a twofer here. So not only does the head have paint on it from some sort of overspray, but it also looks like it got whacked by I don't know, a broom or something up there that knocked it out of position. Up here, we can see that clearly this box will obstruct the sprinkler spray pattern. So just be aware of what's going on in your building and how your storage closets are arranged, and that you're meeting your intended uh, storage practices. Another hot topic that's out there that we see all the time is items resting on or against sprinkler piping and supports. So a lot of times we see that someone comes in and, yeah, we're going to pull all of our cables off of our sprinkler pipe, and no big deal. We're just going to get it off of there. Well, if we take it off of the sprinkler pipe, that's good. That provides us the protection, and we're not going to have our sprinkler system impacted. But we don't always go to the full level and take the items off of the actual sprinkler support rods. So make sure that if you're having someone go through and relocate some of these cabling and different things from your sprinkler piping, make sure that they're including the rods in that discussion too, because if they just zip tie it to the rod, you're not taking that weight off of the sprinkler piping. You're actually just kind of pinpointing it to one specific location. Another part of this discussion is, are the sprinkler supports not sharing supports with anything else? In the 2010 edition of NFPA 13, we're not allowed to share utility supports with any other utility for a sprinkler pipe. In some of the later editions, we're allowed to engineer it in a given way to design for that all that load, that weight load. But the edition that CMS enforces does not account for that. So in this case, instead of rerunning all the supports for all these different utilities here on the right-hand side, maybe we could rerun supports for this particular sprinkler pipe and bring it right up to the deck, because the sprinkler system has to be independently supported. So just keep an eye on that. That's, further on down the road as you look at design your building. Yes, some of the later editions of NFPA 13 might allow for that, but the edition that CMS enforces does not. So just make sure your sprinkler designer is accounting for that difference in standard. Corridor clutter, that comes up all the time. We want to make sure you're keeping your corridors clear, because when we need to be able to get patients up and down the hallway, we want to make sure we can do that without bumping into all kinds of stuff. So keep your corridors clear. You can, and you are permitted to keep certain types of things in the corridor. So equipment that is in use and carts that are in use. And what is that? Well, that's where you have an EVS cart or housekeeping cart, and housekeeping is in the patient room. They're cleaning up the room. Their cart's out in the hallway. No big deal, because that equipment is in use. They're using that cart. They're going to take it when they leave that room and go on to the next one. Crash carts, medical emergency equipment, not in use. So you can have crash carts in the corridor, and that's a good thing. And patient lift and transport equipment. So specific items that are allowed For wheeled equipment, you're allowed to be in the corridor. There are some other exceptions there. You have to have 8-foot corridors here, so you can't just park them in perhaps an older building that you have a 6-foot corridor. You can't just park that stuff in there. You need to have a certain previous allowances there, previous design pieces there. But you see here, these are the specific things that are allowed. You don't see anywhere the computers on wheels, right? Those aren't there. Those aren't in that list. So if you have those computer on wheels, you need to make sure you're accounting for those and not storing those, not keeping those in the corridor. If they're in use, that's a different thing. But if they're no longer in use, and typically that means plugged in and charging in the corridor, we see that a lot. You want to make sure that those have a corral to go into, or they can be charged in a room somewhere else that is not in the corridor. And another piece of this is the only reason that these are allowed in these three types of equipment are allowed to be in the corridor is because your fire plan accounts for them during a fire emergency. It needs to be in writing. It needs to say, during an emergency, we're going to clear our corridors. It's part of that whole race process. Not only are we closing doors and getting people protected, we're also going to clear our corridors. Wall projections, this is still an issue. 6 inches for most existing items, so we're allowed to have say a fire extinguisher that's about 5.5 inches or so in diameter, projecting from the corridor. Anything you install new, we recommend that it be 4 inches, no greater than 4 inches that sticks out from the corridor. So if you have, we have these alcohol-based hand rub all over the place, they're probably going to be 5.5 to 6 inches wide. We don't want to have anything bigger than that, because if we encroach on that 6 inches, then that's getting too big. Water fountains, we see this from time to time. These are corridor projections. We need to account for this in our corridors. So if you're designing a new space and we want to put in some water fountains, make sure they're set back into an alcove that it won't project into the corridor. Some more items about means of egress. Does the means of egress terminate at the public way? So we need to make sure we take that egress stair, that exit stair coming down from the upper parts of the building, all the way out of the building. And once we leave the building, we're not done. We need to be able to get our occupants to the public way safely. So we need to have a hard packed, all weather travel surface. If you're up in the Northeast or up in the northern part of the country, you want to make sure it's free of snow or ice in those winter months, and have some sort of measures to make that happen. Some places have their snow removal crew. They have a map, a site plan of their building, and they mark out here, when you come to get rid of the snow from the parking lot, you're also going to go to these exit points to make sure that we have the snow and ice removed from those exit paths. It says hard packed all weather travel surface. And as you can see here on this right hand side picture, it needs to have um, potentially have to have a paved path, because if we can't keep that grass from free of snow or ice, then that becomes an issue. So sometimes we have to pave it if we're going to be able to keep it free of snow or ice. And then slope, we want to make sure it's nice and flat, and not the slope not exceeding 1 in 20. Why is that the magic number? Well, because if we hit a slope of 1 in 20, then all of a sudden that becomes a ramp, and we need some handrails, and we need some other things that go into that. So we really do mean flat, hard packed leather, all weather travel surface. Also lighting, we have this lighting here that the area has to be lit to the public way. So if we have generator power, we need to have lighting on the exterior of the building on the generator power that will illuminate the path to the public way. And those lights not only have to have lighting there, but we have to have enough lighting that the failure of any one device doesn't leave the area in complete darkness. So sometimes that's 2 light packs, sometimes that's 1 light pack with 2 bulbs in it. We've seen the LED light packs. Is that 1 bulb? Is that 50 bulbs? Well, typically it's the how many control boards do you have in that light pack. That's usually the key to tell us if if that's enough lighting that the failure of any one control board won't leave the whole light turned off. So you have to do some homework on that with those LED light packs, but it certainly is something to consider when you're changing out your fixtures. Talking about means of egress still, make sure that your doors are unlocked at all times, except when. So we have some allowances. If we have delayed egress, and we only can have delayed egress where? In fully sprinklered buildings or fully fire alarm protected buildings. We have access control types of locks. So are we going to limit or restrict access in a certain direction, but we always should have free access in the other direction? And one thing we typically see with access control devices is we don't always have all of the required features of that access control device. So if you looked at the allowances for access control in chapter 7 of NFPA 101, you can see that there's a laundry list of items that are required when we do have access control. Namely, do we have a motion detector that'll release the magnet upon approach? Is there a release button within 5 feet of the opening that says push to exit? That's kind of the backup to the motion detector. Does the magnet release on fire alarm? Does it release on loss of power? Do we have emergency power, emergency lighting on the egress side of that access control? There's a big long list of things that we have to have with those types of devices. So make sure you have all of those pieces parts. One thing we can do, we can lock an area, typically behavioral health, due to the patient's clinical needs. So we've been able to do that for a long time. We want to make sure we're keeping those patients nice and safe and they're not able to harm themselves. And then the new one for the 2012 edition was, are we locking an area for patient special needs? So that's been attributed to birthing units, pediatric units, potentially an ED, depending on how the conversation goes. So what does that entail? Well, that means that you're going to lock the space, but you account for other fire protection features to allow that to happen. And typically that's full sprinkler protection, that's potentially total smoke detection, or staff within the locked unit can remotely unlock those doors as needed. Is it connected to the fire alarm? Is it connected to release on loss of power? Again, all of these other measures and features that are required, and that's where we really want you to dig into the chapter 7, the means of egress chapter, for those particular allowances, because there's a laundry list of things you have to have if you want to use those, but it's something that allows us to do that where we couldn't do that before. All right, let's talk about smoke barriers. So in a given healthcare environment, we want to separate the floor or the area into different compartments. That way, if we did have to horizontally evacuate, we could move just to a different part of the building rather than have to go down and out to a different, vertically to a different part of the building. So the smoke barriers you can see are outlined here in red lines. We want to make sure that they go from outside wall to outside wall. Sometimes we see them stop short at a window, a curtain wall type of thing. So we want to make sure we continue that barrier out from outside to outside. They need to go from floor to deck. Sometimes we see them stop short. Sometimes we see them with openings at the fluted deck where the corrugated metal at the top of the wall doesn't quite make it all the way up, and that gap that's created by that by the corrugated metal needs to be filled in with some kind of UL approved either fire stop system or some sort of construction system. You need to have all penetrations properly sealed. So you can see here with the data cables coming through here, there's a couple different colors going on here in this penetration. Well, that tells us that it's probably 2 different types of material, maybe 2 different manufacturers. We don't really know that, but we know it's definitely 2 different types of material. And we want to make sure that we're not mixing any kind of UL system. A UL system is just that. It's a particular product designed and tested to meet the requirements for a smoke barrier penetration. So if we're going to install something, we're going to make sure we're installing it to that UL system. Sometimes we see our walls stenciled. That's a good thing. That tells whoever might be coming up to run piping and things that they need to seal up their penetrations, except when they don't follow the rules and they just poke a hole right through your stencil and don't end up sealing it up. So in this case, they sealed it where the wall meets the penetration, and that's good. That's part of it. But the second half of that is to also seal the penetration where the cables come out of that sleeve, because not only could heat and superheated gases and smoke come through this opening here, they can also come through this opening. So we want to make sure that we treat this as an entire UL system, and you'll see that if you use any of the different fire stop manufacturers. If you look at their systems, you'll see protection both at the wall and where the cables come out of the sleeve or pipe. Or we just have just missing block altogether. Want to make sure that those walls are intact from deck to deck, and that's an example of that. We have smoke resisting doors, and those doors are self-closing. You don't see anything about latching hardware on smoke barrier doors because that's not required in healthcare. We do like to say that if you have latching hardware on your doors, they need to function. So just because it's not required doesn't mean it can just be hanging off. If you have the equipment there, it should be working in working fashion. Corridor doors, sometimes, so we need to have corridor doors to separate the rooms from the corridor. We need to protect those patients in their rooms. So if we have an emergency or we have a fire starting, we need to close those doors quickly. Those doors shall close with a pushing or a pulling motion. So if we have any kind of wedges or door stops or hold open devices or chairs or anything like that, we want to make sure that those aren't impeding the actual function of pulling the door closed quickly. You can see an example here where the chair is parked here, and it won't allow that door to be closed quickly by the staff as they're trying to protect the patients. Here, same thing. It's going to be very difficult to try and pull that door closed because of that wedge. The chair here holding the door open. Again, we just want to be able to use our doors when we need them. In some cases, maybe this type of room, this office, maybe this door doesn't require a self-closing device. So instead of the staff, whoever's office this is, all the time they have to prop the door open, perhaps the solution is to get rid of the self-closing device. It's not always the solution because sometimes it has to be self-closing for another reason, but sometimes it's the answer. So you can take a look at it differently, and maybe you take the problem that the staff are trying to solve and you can help them with that. And then you don't want to be putting on door stop, kick down hold opens like that, or these hold opens with the bumper stops on them. Those just create problems, and a lot of places that we've talked to have gone to supply chain and prohibited this type of purchase from being made. So you're able to keep your doors free and closing. Why is that? Because we've just seen in all the different fires that we've investigated over the years, we've seen that keeping a door closed, even a typical, I'll call it quote unquote typical corridor door that doesn't require any type of special fire rating, even a typical corridor can significantly stop the spread of fire and smoke. You can see if this door was left open and that from the corridor into the room, and the fire was in the corridor, this room was totally destroyed. This room here with the door closed, you can see the ceiling's still intact. The plant is still hanging on the wall. The photograph here on the wall is untarnished. You can see the difference it makes just by being able to close those doors. So if we have any delay in that by having the door propped open or what have you, we want to make sure we're preventing that delay from happening and just accounting for that for the helping the staff out. The doors have to be constructed of inch and 3/4 solid doors or 20 minutes when the building is not sprinklered. I'm sorry, the smoke compartment is not sprinklered, not fully sprinklered. There's no door construction requirement when it's sprinklered. So again, it doesn't have to be any particular type of fire rated door in a sprinklered environment. It's going to significantly stop the spread of smoke and fire from happening to getting to the patients. So what are some of the common deficiencies with corridors? Well, we saw those being propped open, but in the non-sprinklered areas, sometimes they're not solid corridors. Sometimes they're flimsy, um, we'll say panel doors perhaps that don't have the sufficient material to provide that protection. And also vision panels or windows that are in those corridor walls. Sometimes they break, they get chipped, they get nailed with a cart or something, and they have to get replaced. If you're in a non-sprinklered area, chances are that that window has to be a fire rated window. So don't just go replacing it with anything you have laying around. Make sure you're getting the right type of product. And doors need to remain smoke tight. And what is that? Well, it has to close nice and tight to the door frame. So you can see here, here's the corridor side. Here's the inside of the room. The face of the door is here with the door stop. You can see it in the plan view here. So the gap that we're worried about as far as CMS is concerned is if we're in a fully sprinklered environment, no more than half an inch between the door stop here and the face of the door here. If we're not sprinklered or partially, that gap goes down to a quarter inch. That's not a very big gap. So part of doing your rounds or your periodic checks of your corridors, you should be looking for that type of deficiency, making sure that those doors are closing and they're not warped or twisting or something, so it's stepping away from that door stop. Because we need to have a nice tight seal. You can see that here's the meeting edges. I have this part down here for the meeting edges of 2-leaf corridors. Should have no greater than 1/8 of an inch gap. So here's the meeting edges of a full-size active leaf door and an inactive leaf. This would be no different if it were 2 full-size doors to, say, a storage room or to some sort of electrical closet type of situation. That 1/8 of an inch gap is still the maximum. Sweep boundary doors. So we're seeing that corridor doors aren't provided with proper latching hardware. And this is something that has come up very recently and is kind of impacting folks a whole lot. So we have to take, important part of maintaining your building and the fire protection features in that building are having accurate and current life safety drawings. So you're relying on those drawings pretty significantly to identify where your barriers are, where your features are, but also where are your suites. So if you have a suite arrangement like this, we're not worried necessarily about latching hardware on these doors because that's within the suite, but we are worried about where that suite ends, and we would be looking for positive latching hardware on those suite doors. And why is that? Well, the Joint Commission, in response to CMS's interpretation in the final rule when they adopted the NFPA 101 2012 edition, said that we need to have positive latching hardware on all corridor doors. So for a long time, we were able to use 5 pounds of force, and we called it the 5-pound rule. Well, that is no more. If we have corridor doors, they have to have active positive latching hardware, except for where we have power doors that are equipped with power doors are equipped with positive latching hardware, unless you all as the organization can verify the equipment is not an option provided by the door manufacturer. So basically that means if your power doors, your swinging power doors, don't have latching hardware because perhaps when you have the automatic opener open the door up, you didn't have any kind of interconnect between the latching mechanism to retract the latch and then to fully open it. um, if that is not present on your hardware, you would have to do some homework to talk to the door manufacturer, the manufacturer of the operator, the door operator, and verify that that is not an option to add on that latching interconnect. So if you can't find that out, then you certainly have to add latching hardware. We're seeing that a whole lot throughout the country, and that's putting people in a really hard position because typically those are doors to, say, an OR suite or perhaps a PACU where you're not typically opening the door manually. You're relying on the automatic opener to open it. So you're going to have to add some interconnects to the latching mechanism. You're going to have to add potentially interconnects to the fire alarm system. So it's a pretty costly fix. So I suggest doing a round through your building, using your life safety drawings to identify where your suite boundaries are and where you're potentially hung up for that type of situation. Hazardous areas, I'll touch on this briefly. If you have storage in a given area or a soiled utility type of room, you're looking for a 1-hour enclosure with a 3/4 hour door. If it has sprinkler protection, then you're relying on just simply a smoke partition, a self-closing door with a positive latch, and that's usually found with 50 square feet or greater storage areas in existing. If you were to build a new storage room in a new wing or a new reconstruction project, um, if you're going to add sprinkler protection more than likely, and have a 1 hour enclosure with a 3/4 hour door. That door has to self-close and positive latch because it's a fire door, and that's usually 100 square foot or greater of storage. So the threshold is 50 square feet or greater. You need to have at least a smoke partition, as we see up here, smoke partition, smoke tight walls. Or if it's greater than 100 square feet, then you're probably going to have a 1 hour enclosure in new healthcare. Um, One thing that was added in the last couple cycles of the Joint Commission standard is those doors have to positively latch. So if we look at the LSO 20130 EP number 3, and I have that here, we can see that doors to rooms containing flammable or combustible materials are provided with positive latching hardware. So what does that tell us? That means that a hazardous area that perhaps may not have had positive latching hardware in the past now will be required to have latching hardware. And where this can become particularly problematic would be, say, on the inside sterile core of your ORs. Here's an example of that. The ORs are on the outside here of this particular organization. And in the middle, they have a hazardous area because what's stored in here are all the sterile supplies. um, well, if that's the case, these doors would have to positively latch under this new section, this new note under EP3. So again, having accurate life safety drawings, know what you're holding your facility to, so you can accurately assess it is greatly important. If we're going to if we're going to change a room, convert a room that was not previously a storage room or hazardous area, and we say, hey, we have this extra space down at the end of the hallway, and we need to convert it to a storage room because we want to get our stuff out of the hallway. Well, you can do that using Chapter 43. Chapter 43 is renovations and rehabilitation to the building. For existing healthcare occupancies that are fully sprinklered, again, that's where that fully sprinkled comes in. We definitely want to have protection. Where a change of a room or space not exceeding 250 square feet results in the room that is potentially, described as a hazardous area, the requirements for new construction shall not apply as long as it meets the requirements for existing hazardous area, and that's a smoke tight partition, self-closing door, and the positive latching door. So you can see we can use this section to our benefit if you're trying to take a room at the end of the hallway or a vacated space and turn it into a storage room. As long as it's 250 square feet or less, then we can do that with the proper protection. Going into chapter 3 a little bit more, or sorry, chapter 43 a little bit more, repair, renovation, modification. How can we use this? Well, we have to first define what we're doing. Is it a repair? Is it a renovation? Is it modification? Or is it reconstruction? So this will kind of define what we're doing in each of those spaces. And this tells us what requirements we would have to then meet. So if we're just repairing something, restoring it to its existing condition, then we just have to meet existing requirements. If we're renovating, and that's replacement in kind, or strengthening or upgrading without reconfiguring the actual building, then we can still meet existing requirements. But if we modify or reconstruct, that's where we have to meet new requirements. So if we're changing things, removing, reconfiguring that space, we need to convert and go to the new section of that particular occupancy. And typically we're talking about new healthcare. I don't think there are any questions have come in at this point, so I'm going to try and touch on the CMS waivers that we've been talking about. So CMS has granted this permission under the Social Security Act, Section 1135. That's where that 1135 waiver comes in. As a result, CMS has granted blanket waivers as of March 1st of this year through the end of the emergency declaration. We are still within that currently as of October 21st. So these still apply. These waivers do not require a request to be sent to CMS or that notification be made to the CMS regional office. You are granted this permission or allowance automatically, essentially. So you don't have to contact them to do that. That is different than what we would typically see for a categorical waiver or something of that nature, where we have to notify somebody. This is we're getting it granted to us because they are saying it's allowed. So what does this do? Well, they're temporarily modifying the ITM provisions, and I have the specific publication if we want to go into the fine granular detail. But I wanted to focus more on what they did not include in the waiver. So there's a lot of allowances for ITM, so you need to relax some of your testing and maintenance for different services and protection features, and that's all well and good. But they specifically called out these items that were not included in that, so we have to continue to maintain those items as listed here. We need to continue to test our fire pump test weekly or monthly, depending on the type of motor we have. So if we're doing our deadhead churns, we need to make sure we're continuing those. Those were not allowed to be stopped or reduced. Portable monthly fire extinguisher inspections. We need to make sure we're maintaining and continuing those. Some of those were done by outside vendors at your facilities, and some of your facilities might have vendor and visitor restrictions. So there's some sort of access granting you may have to do, or you may have to train your internal staff so they can get around to those different areas and different um, um, different areas where the fire extinguishers are located. Elevators with firefighters emergency operations, so we can't reduce our testing for your elevators. You need to continue your monthly testing for emergency generators and associated switches, so you need to continue those monthly tests there. And then also, if you have any type of daily inspection rounds for any of your interim life safety measures, you need to maintain those daily inspections as you've self declared. So you can see there that although we're allowing, CMS is allowing the reduction in some of the ITM in the building, they specifically will not allow the reduction in these tests and inspections. So just be aware of that. You want to always conduct any kind of risk assessment when you start to reduce your testing. Are you really seeing an advanced burden by continuing those tests? Possibly, or maybe not. We kind of have seen that first wave come and go. It sounds like we may be hitting a second wave, so it's something to consider. What did you learn from that first go around that you could probably implement this second time around without having to reduce your inspection, testing, and maintenance? And that's just my fire protection background coming into play here. CMS will also permit a waiver of the outside window requirements. So if you have a sleeping unit, a sleeping room for a patient, they have to have an outside window. CMS is now removing that requirement during this pandemic, and that's basically so you can reuse some of the spaces that you have in your building to allow those patients to be treated. So that's something to consider there. If you have a space that needs to be converted, they're not going to penalize you for not having an outside window if you're trying to do the right thing for the patient. Alcohol-based hand rub dispensers, we're able to put those in places that maybe we couldn't put before, but we still want to consider where we're putting those, so we're not putting them in an area or a resident population that might provide accidental ingestion. Sometimes that's the behavioral health units, maybe a dementia type of unit. We don't want to have anywhere stored outside of any fire protection. That'll put it into an increased fire risk. So if you have anything stored over 5 gallons, you still need to protect them as appropriate. And that would be probably where you're storing those in bulk. Maybe you got a shipment as a donation and it's sitting on your loading dock, or maybe it's in your central supply area. Make sure you're accounting for where that bulk storage is, and you're protecting it accordingly. You still want to make sure they're not being used inappropriately, and that's just kind of a general clause there. Fire drills, they're permitting a documented orientation program related to your current fire plan, and of course, based on the current facility conditions. You can see that new employees, existing employees, you still want to train them and educate them on their actual duties in the area, but you don't have to necessarily have an actual fire drill that's going to move staff all together as one. They're trying to, social distance and account for that. Temporary construction partitions, where typically we're not allowed to use temporary partitions between patients. CMS has granted an allowance where you can use temporary walls and partitions that may not be truly fire resistant materials. So some more guidance there in that particular section 19332 for what exactly that goes into. But that's basically allowing where we can have some different type of materials being used to separate patients from one another. Some updates based on the current ASHE or the latest ASHE conference that was going on a couple weeks back. One important note here is for linen waste chutes. Linen waste discharge service doors are self-closing. It removed a reference to latching. So some of us have the guillotine style sliding chute doors at the discharge and, in the basement, typically in the basement. So for a long time that CMS would expect that bottom door to the CMS Joint Commission would require that door to latch, positively latch. Well, the later editions of NFPA 82, which is the chute standard, they remove that requirement for the latching in some cases because of the angle at which the guillotine slides, etc. So that is one important note that they removed that reference to latching. That was a big deal, and allowed people to keep the doors that they've had for a long time. There's been questions coming out about virtual surveys. So Joint Commission at ASHE publicized that they are going to have virtual surveys, virtual document reviews at the initial accreditation survey only at this time. So they're not going to do your 3-year triennial survey. They're not going to do that virtually. They're going to come in person and look through your documentations. There was a lot of confusion there going on back and forth. So that gave some good guidance as to what exactly they would be looking at. You can see here that if they are going to do a virtual survey for that initial accreditation survey, it'll be inspection, testing, maintenance, document review, emergency management policy review, and emergency management plan review, and then also no virtual building tour. They'll do it at a different time. So you can see there that if you are going to be getting a virtual survey, an initial accreditation survey, the chances are it'll be a virtual one. But if it's a triennial, it probably won't be. It'll probably be all in person. And they have a document upload portal that if you're going to be as a part of that, I'm sure the Joint Commission is going to help you work through that. Joint Commission, what they're working on. So they provided a new kitchen checklist, and I can probably get that out to the group at the end of this call here. It's basically a checklist that accounts for not just fire safety, life safety items, but also food expiration, food temperature logs, chipped tiles in the building. So environment of care stuff. It's kind of an all-inclusive kitchen checklist that they're going to use as they walk through your kitchens to make sure that you're keeping the food safe and clean and healthy and all that good stuff. What spaces are they going to be surveying? Well, it's going to the survey is going to extend all the typical inpatient locations, but it's also going to extend to where patients customarily go to receive patient care. It will also allow those other buildings or areas to be considered healthcare, but not necessarily hold them to that healthcare requirement. That's important to know. As long as you're maintaining your occupancies and your MOB areas, just because they're seeing patients doesn't necessarily mean it has to be healthcare. But the Joint Commission will be going to those spaces to kind of trace down those areas to make sure that they're being maintained and you're meeting the appropriate requirements for that given occupancy. So whether that's a business occupancy or it's an ambulatory healthcare occupancy, whatever it might be, you're meeting those particular requirements. One thing of note here is the BBI as of January 2020 will be required or has been required to be maintained in your electronic statement of conditions. So if you haven't gone in there in a while, go back into your eBBI and make the updates appropriate before your next survey, because they're going to be looking for it. One topic that came up was blowout or scab patches. You've seen some of these, and the September EC news that came out gave some guidance on scab patching a rated wall. This is not an appropriate UL system, so this would not be permitted in new healthcare, new construction, or a new fix, a new penetration that you might be putting up. Some of these aren't even good for existing. But it's important to know that you shouldn't have these kind of corrections. The appropriate repair would be to cut out the drywall from stud to stud, infill it, and then seal it up flush as it were part of the actual wall itself. So they're going to be looking for that. Going to be looking for some mixed fire stopping, and you can see that here, the pink, the red and the green, and kind of all a whole big mess there. So make sure you're maintaining your barrier walls appropriately and not with any scab patches. Surveyor days, there's no change here. They just wanted to talk about it during ASHI that back in 2018 they've kind of revised the actual days on site. If you have 1 million square feet, you're automatically getting up to 1 million square feet. You're getting automatically 2 surveyor days, life safety code surveyor days. If you have 1 million to 1.5 million, you're getting 3 days. And then if you have more than that, then it's going to be a review based on that. And if you have non-hospital ASCs or these other occupancy types, you're going to have one life safety surveyor, life safety code surveyor days, LCSC. And then they added 1 day for each freestanding emergency department and ambulatory surgery center. This is a big deal. So if you have those offsite locations that you're responsible for maintaining, you want to make sure that you're well aware that they're going to be going out there to do a survey, but they've added an entire day for that space. So make sure you're aware of that. You get an assessment done out there. You make sure you have everything accounted for and everything's ready to go by the time they arrive. You should be doing that anyway. I have to officially say that, but it's getting survey ready, of course. Some more things: the fire response plan. Make sure you're accounting for the licensed independent practitioners. Some of those, they come and go, or some are more long term. Just make sure you account for them somehow in your fire safety plan, your fire response plan. So typically you have everyone has a job, everyone has a role to play in the race process. So as you are identifying roles and positions and responsibilities, make sure you're accounting for that licensed independent practitioner in your fire response plan. Generator remote stop buttons. Those are still a hot button. No pun intended there. But make sure you have them, and they're not immediately at the generator. They need to be outside of the enclosure. And if it's an exterior enclosure, they need to be outside of that also. I don't know exactly where that means for your particular facility, but it just means it has to be well away. And there's some further information there in those 2 sections under ECO 20503 EP11. Cooking equipment, you have to move it out to clean behind it, of course. So if you're going to be moving your equipment around, it has to go back to where it was, because if you have a deep fat fryer, it's being protected in accordance with a designed system, the hood's fire suppression system. So you need to make sure that it goes back to the appropriate location. You don't necessarily have to have wheel chocks for that equipment, but you have to have some sort of means that it's going back to the right place, both laterally and front to back. And another reminder that you're performing your generator tests in appropriate frequencies. One thing that comes up with generators is these new maintenance-free batteries, which are allowed to be installed as of the new adoption of the 2012 code. But part of that maintenance-free battery, it does require some maintenance, oddly enough. And that means you have to do a specific gravity or monthly conductivity test in accordance with NFPA 110. So that means taking a tester and making sure conductivity is being maintained. And it's not an involved test, but you want to make sure you're doing it, because those maintenance-free batteries are not totally maintenance-free. We talked about wheeled carts in the corridor, but one specific thing that was not necessarily touched on in the Joint Commission session was, what is what is patient transport equipment? Are hospital beds considered patient transport equipment? Well, you need to kind of have a discussion with your transportation department. Does transport use beds to transport patients from one area to another? And if they do, then they are transportation equipment. So you kind of have to have a discussion with your transport people before you can answer that question. But that would play into the role of, is patient lift and transportation equipment permitted to be in your corridor? Well, if your patient beds are being moved on gurneys and not on beds, then beds would not be transportation equipment. So it's an important discussion on where what you're allowed to be parking things in your corridor there. A little bit of background here for the average RFIs that are being found during surveys prior to the adoption of the and implementation of the 2012 Life Safety Code and the new survey process. You can see here the average C categories that were identified. And then from that point on, we moved to that safer matrix and the see it, cite it, and you can clearly see in the numbers the average number of findings is going up. So be prepared for that. Be prepared to address that at your closeouts and with your leadership. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are higher risk items. It's just something that is cited. You see it, and they're going to cite it. So instead of having 3 penetrations that rolled up to be one finding, those 3 become 3. So just keep that in mind. Surveyor training. So CMS offers this life safety code transition course where we got a lot of this information and kind of what surveyors are being trained to look for. You can take this training. It's right here at this link. We'll make sure we can get this to the group. And then if that's not enough training, we also have Jensen Hughes Academy with a whole assortment of online training that you can go through, from simple sprinkler system types of training. So very, very basic to all the way up to design type of questions, all the way to OR surgical fire training. We now have virtually on this Jensen Hughes Academy platform, fire door inspection training, all those types of different education if you're so inclined. So you can reach out directly to me or to Joe can get you this information. I thought I saw a question or two come in, but Joe, did that get bumped?
No, we were just testing the questions to make sure they were working. So
okay. Great.
But no, thanks, Colin, for the information. Very informative. I didn't see any questions come in, but we'll just pose one more time for questions on any topics here. If you could type that into the question and answer window, or if you don't see it in there, if you want to raise your hand or do something, we'll try to get you on there. But great.
Yeah, sorry I took a little bit more than allotted, but you could see that there was a lot of content in that to pass along. Feel free to shoot me a note, drop me a line, however. Contact information is here on the screen. And again, we'll work with Joe and his team to get this as much of this information out to you as I'm able to get sorted out, sent out.
All right, I'm just trying to see if there's any hands raised or anything. I don't see anything. So thanks again, everyone. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.